Aloha, welcome back to the Anxiety Coaches Podcast. I'm your host and coach, Gina Ryan, and I'm so happy to be with you again today as we consider the many ways to bring your mind and body back to its natural peace and calm. In today's episode, I want to talk about the causes, the symptoms, and actually coping with anxious, intrusive thoughts. Now, the first piece I want to talk about is the fact that everybody has intrusive thoughts. Now, what makes the difference between intrusive thoughts and anxious intrusive thoughts is the fact that those of you who are listening who have been anxious or who have had high stress levels in your life have probably gone from having an intrusive thought in your life to having an anxious intrusive thought. And by that, I mean you paid so much attention to this weird, intrusive, cuckoo thought that you became anxious around it. So what do I mean by an intrusive thought? I'm going to give you some from my own personal life. I had anxiety for a long time. I crawled out of that wormhole, and I have to tell you, intrusive thoughts still came and even come here and there. And what do I mean by an intrusive thought? Well, I call them cuckoo thoughts. They're thoughts that come and you have to almost say to yourself, where on earth did that come from? Or what is making me think that? And now with the frame of mind that I have now, I can look at that actually with a little bit of curiosity and even a little bit of humor. But back in the day when I was highly stressed, that intrusive thought would have become an anxious intrusive thought. And here's one that I had. I'm remembering this one because I've talked about it on the show before. So it had to be about 10, maybe even 15 years ago. And I remember that I had gone to this beautiful cliff here on Maui. And it was this breathtaking view with these gorgeous waves crashing on the rocks below. And it was up pretty high. But the view was beautiful. The breeze is blowing. I'm standing on the edge of it. I mean, because you just kind of go there. It's a beautiful thing to do. And I thought, now this was an intrusive thought, what if I jump? Now, it didn't bother me because I just saw that as a cuckoo thought that came out of nowhere just from the circumstances I was in. But back in the day when I was highly stressed, when my nervous system was not on keel, I would have been afraid of that thought. And that's the difference. That's what I'm talking about here. Everybody has intrusive thoughts. Everybody has, I don't want to give you any more to think about because y'all have your own, and most of you don't live here with a cliff in front of you. So that one's not going to come up for you. We have all had our own recipe of what would be a thought that came up out of our unconscious, out of the environment, out of the collective consciousness. Who knows? But a thought came, it was intrusive, it was cuckoo, as I like to call it. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I, in this day and age, with my nervous system where it is right now, was not afraid of it. But back in the day, I would have been, and that would have taken me to all kinds of different places. So hang in there with me today as I talk about this, because I know if I could find my way out of it, you can too. So intrusive thoughts are those unwelcome and distressing mental images, ideas, or impulses that can invade a person's consciousness. And it can cause some discomfort. And it can also, if you are really not on keel and really feeling anxious, it can cause significant anxiety. While everyone experiences these passing negative or disturbing thoughts, those of us who are struggling with high stress or anxiety often struggle with persistent and distressing intrusive thoughts that can disrupt daily life. And that comes from your nervous system being on high alert. A single cuckoo thought that happens to roll through will not throw you off keel normally. But if you are highly stressed or anxious, it can send you for a loop. But we want to remember, as we're talking about this today, that having a thought does not make it true. Some of our thoughts are helpful, some are not. Some of them are distressing and unwelcome, and some of them are delightful. We have to make space for all of them, and we have to be the ones that decide which thoughts are going to run the show. So, intrusive thoughts are really characterized by the involuntary nature of them. They do occur spontaneously, and often they are unwanted. Using my example from standing on the edge of a beautiful cliff, it was spontaneous and it was unwanted. I am not someone who was thinking of wanting to jump off the cliff. Now, this is where people get scared because they think things like, well, I thought it. It must have come from me. It must be something I want to do. This is the thing I want to make perfectly clear to you. Having a thought does not make it true. It does not have to do anything with you. It was a thought that can occur spontaneously and is simply passing through. And another way that intrusive thoughts are characterized is by their disturbing content. It wasn't intrusive because it was a lovely thought of peace, calm, and joy that I was having. It was an intrusive thought because of its disturbing content. Common themes for intrusive thoughts include things like fears of harm, whether harming yourself or another, violence, contamination, taboo subjects. A lot of it comes up around religion. So it's that kind of disturbing content that characterizes an intrusive thought. But again, and I'm going to say this over and over today, having a thought does not make it true or mean that it has anything to do with you. Now, another characteristic is persistence. And this is where we get into trouble because they can persist despite efforts to ignore or suppress them, sweep them under the carpet, or whatever way you have learned to deal in your life with this kind of an intrusive thought. They do become persistent and they become bigger the more we fear them, and they become bigger and more persistent the more we try to get rid of them. And even ignoring them can be a way of trying to get rid of them so they can grow. So you want to acknowledge it, see it. Oh, I saw that thought. I hear you. You can keep going. We want to go to neutral with it. We don't want to be afraid of it and try to get rid of it, but we don't want to act like it's all lovey-dovey toward it because it is not something that we want to be including in our life. So do know that if it's persistent, it is probably an intrusive thought. And another characteristic, finally, is it has an impact on you in your mood because an intrusive thought can really evoke anxiety, guilt, shame. And again, these come up and they persist because we are frightened of them or we have guilt or shame around them. So you can see where that can become a vicious cycle in and of itself. So what do we do here? I want you to remember when you have some of these characteristics or symptoms of these intrusive thoughts that you can decide what thoughts you believe and what ones you let pass by in neutral. You just let it be there. You don't try to get rid of it. You don't try to run away from it or totally distract yourself to think about something else. You can go on to think about something else because nature abhors a vacuum. You've got to have something in there, but don't do it out of fear. That only gives it more power. You can decide to just acknowledge it and let it pass by. Now, there is a difference between normal thoughts and intrusive thoughts. A normal thought would be a fleeting thought, and it doesn't typically cause significant distress or disruption in your day. And they can be reasoned with easily, dismissed. It can just be, it came and it went. But in contrast, the intrusive thought can feel out of control and overwhelming. And that can be because of the subject matter that it has to do with, the disturbing content of harm, self-harm, harm of others, violence, contamination, like I said, taboo subjects, religious subjects. That can actually begin to make one feel like it's out of control, or it can start to feel really overwhelming. Why am I thinking that? And the intrusive thought can also be characterized as irrational or exaggerated. So if you can see it as like this really super irrational thing, or maybe something that would be somewhat normal, but then way exaggerated, okay, you can begin to see then maybe this is an intrusive thought and I don't need to give it any more attention. It doesn't have anything that I need to get from it, because we get to decide on our thoughts what we believe from them and what we don't. And that's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? Like, okay, now we're beginning to be separate from our thoughts, and we are looking at our thoughts not as who we are, but as things that we are either going to take along with us or we are not going to take along with us. But back to the difference between normal and intrusive thoughts, the intrusive thought also can lead to compulsive behaviors as a way to alleviate the anxiety that they cause. And this is where we can get into OCD, obsessive and compulsive type of behaviors. This can be where they come from. So the more we can know about our thinking, about our thoughts, and about who we are as separate from our thoughts, the more we can manage this and cope without going into fear. So where do these come from? Like, what on earth would cause me to stand on the edge of a cliff and say, oh, but what if I jump? So intrusive thoughts can arise from a number of different places and a number of different factors. Anxiety in and of itself can be the factor, because your nervous system then is on high alert. So everything looks dangerous. So the thoughts that are coming through are probably ones to try to keep you safe. Maybe that was something inside me trying to keep me safe. Like, don't get so close to the edge. Like, that would have been nicer to hear in my mind than what if I jump? But maybe that's just how the mind was working. I did not become afraid of it. So I want you to remember that. You don't have to be afraid of those either. They are not who you are. So anxiety can cause us to have these. OCD can cause us to have this. PTSD, if you have post-traumatic stress in your life, this can bring it up, as can specific phobias. Now, I'm not particularly afraid of heights, so that wasn't what was happening with me. Also, could be stressful life events, traumatic experiences, or major life changes can trigger intrusive thoughts, as can neurological factors, meaning imbalances in our neurotransmitters or brain activity can contribute to those things. So you want to be sure if you are having these a lot and you are using particular medications or have had brain injuries or any of these other things that you have that stuff checked out, because it could be an imbalance. So what are we going to do with this, right? Because they do come. And I have to tell you, I have heard so many people's intrusive thoughts that I could write a book about them. And they are all kinds of flavors, all kinds of subject matters you cannot even imagine. Now, I am not here to give your anxious mind more fodder for coming up with scary, intrusive thoughts, so I'm not going to get into them. But I want you to know I have heard things that I never, ever could have even imagined. But that's how active our minds are. We don't even know what it can come up with. And these people were able to get through them. They were terrified of them when we began talking. And they were able to work their way through it by understanding what is happening with the intrusive thought and by some of these strategies I want to talk to you about right now. Because understanding and managing intrusive thoughts can greatly improve your quality of life, because the more you can stay on keel with that nervous system, the less you're going to fall into being afraid of some kind of cuckoo thought that happens to roll through your head. First off, I want you to understand about identifying triggers and patterns. And a good way to do that, if you are having a lot of intrusive thoughts, is to keep a journal and track when you have had these intrusive thoughts and how you might have been feeling in that day, and recognize any patterns or common triggers that may come up, such as stress, fatigue, specific situations, or environments. That can be really helpful. Next, you can develop a support network. And this is where having family members or friends, a therapist, coach, a group, such as our ACP group coaching, where you can actually go somewhere, talk about this thing, this cuckoo thought you had, and no one will judge you for it because they've been there too. And we can help support you. And also, lifestyle changes. This is getting our nervous system back on keel again. We want to have physical activities that help to reduce our stress and anxiety levels. So make sure you're getting regular exercise and watch your sleep hygiene. Having a consistent sleep routine can seriously improve your mental resilience, as can eating nutritious foods. And by that, I mean a whole food, plant-based way of eating can really support your overall well-being and your mental health stability. Intrusive thoughts are common, and it's a challenge for anybody. But for people with anxiety, it can be even more discomfort and more difficult, but effective coping strategies can make a difference. We all have intrusive thoughts, but when we are anxious, they grab us as if they were who we are and that was our truth. But that is not true. So by understanding the nature of intrusive thoughts and distinguishing them from normal thoughts, identifying your triggers, building a support network, and making those positive lifestyle changes for your nervous system, we can all gain control and reduce the impact of the intrusive thoughts in our daily life. Remember, your awareness are separate from the thoughts that go through your head. Let them be there, because fighting them only makes them stronger. I hope today's show was helpful for you. I would love to hear from you. If you are struggling with this or if you have questions, send me an email, anxietycoachespodcast@gmail.com. And now for today's quote. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. And that's from Eckhart Tolle. I'll be back in a few more days with another podcast. Until then, be well and aloha.